Well, on this Sunday, we're going to take a look at the 2017-2018 season and some news and notes from that. That's right. Not the season that we just finished in June, but the one before that. And kind of a big year for the NHL in that we expanded to 31 teams, and Team 31 fit right in right away. According to the NHL's annual from that year, or the Hockey News, I should say, their annual from that year, the number one player in the NHL, Connor McDavid. Number 2, Sidney Crosby. So there it is, 2 years in a row. McDavid's number 1. Nikita Kucherov, number 3. Erik Karlsson at 4. Victor Hedman at 5. Taylor Hall at 6. Patrice Bergeron at 7. Nathan MacKinnon at 8. Mark Scheifele at 9. And Alex Ovechkin at 10. So that rounds out your top 10. And of course, they do a top 50 every year. So when I do the top 10, I'm not including the rest of the top 50 because that'd be ridiculous. So if you have a chance to get some old Hockey News annuals, they are probably the best of the bunch. Sports Forecaster's kind of good too. Anyways, Vegas, for Vegas reasons, is born. This was a season that we watched Vegas go out and win a lot of games. And the interesting thing is that there were points during this season where Vegas was winning a lot of games, and I couldn't figure out how. Where they might play poorly for 56 minutes, have a good 4 minutes, and win the game. And I'd look at the end of the night and go, all right, so Vegas won again. I'm not sure how, and for Vegas reasons is born out of that. They won 51 games. They get 109 points, and of course they went to the Stanley Cup Finals in year one, breaking all the rules of how first-year franchises work and raising the expectations for Seattle to a point where in 2 years, good luck, Seattle, you're going to need it. Anyways, so Vegas goes on this incredible run, and the relationship between the city and the team is solidified through, of course, the tragedy that occurred outside the Mandalay Bay Hotel. And, you know, that horrible incident led to this great bond between team and city. So that was the good that came out of the absolutely horrendous. Now, there's no way to really segue from that. So I acknowledge that while moving on to the next team on the list, which was Winnipeg. This is the best year that any team that's played in the NHL named Jets has had. So, not just for this iteration of the Jets, but for the previous one as well. This was the best season that any Winnipeg team had. Getting to the conference finals raised the expectations to we should be Stanley Cup favorites. And they were. A lot of people last summer picked them to be Stanley Cup champions, including myself. A lot of people thought, all right, this is Winnipeg's time. And it's kind of sort of Canada's time. We're getting to that stage where fans in Canada are kind of getting sick of not having a Stanley Cup champion. Although, every summer, whichever players win the Stanley Cup, there's normally at least half of them that are Canadian and bring the cup up here for their day with the cup. So the cup still travels to Canada and it still resides in Toronto, just never won by those teams in Canada, so that we get to see the actual initial celebration, not just, hey, look, it's my day with the cup. Anyways, moving on. Anaheim. A bad hip derails Kessler that year. He only plays 44 games. Of course, we know now that he'll never be the same. 101 points and swept in round 1. So, swept aside rather easily. And the Ducks have their problems. And this is where the scoring issue really starts to show up with 2 of the California teams during the playoffs in 2018. So, yeah, the Ducks swept in round 1. A sign of things to come. Arizona, they failed to win in regulation for their first 21 games. I did a video on everything is wrong with Arizona, and it was everything. The most noteworthy thing, too, out of that was that Doug MacLean, and I hate to mention this, but, you know, it was a funny comment at the time when they were talking about everything going wrong with Arizona. MacLean said Raanta has to make a save. At the time, Antti Raanta was injured. So he can't make a save while he's on the injured reserve list. And not only that, but Raanta ends up having one of the best save percentages in the entire National Hockey League by the end of the year. So it was noteworthy. Carolina, Tom Dundon buys the team. He buys the team in the midst of another year of losing money and poor attendance and talk from fans everywhere like, oh, Carolina, they should move Carolina. Why isn't Carolina moving? Well, now Dundon's in charge. 83 points that season, and they clean house. Dundon goes, this isn't going anywhere. So Ron Francis gets thrown out. In comes Don Waddell. Peters gets fired as coach. And we know that Peters ends up in Calgary, and we know things turn out kind of well for Peters in Calgary, but that'll be for the video for the 2018-2019 season, not for this one. But yeah, Carolina, house cleaning is done. A lot of players get traded, moved on from. And we know that things are going to actually get better for them coming out of that. It didn't look like it would at the time. Colorado, they go from 48 points to 95. Moving Duchesne turns out to be the best thing to happen to this team, whether it's coincidental or not. As soon as that trade takes place, Colorado seems to be better. And they added Samuel Girard in that trade. I like Girard a lot. And apparently so does Joe Sakic based on the contract that he's given him this summer. Columbus, back-to-back playoffs for the first time ever. So when we talk about Columbus and, winning around and sort of we can do golf claps for that and kind of whatever. But the reality is Columbus, for the first time in their history where they're at, they're finally experiencing regular success and an expectation of playoffs. So that's the first time ever that they'd finished with back-to-back playoffs. We know, of course, that they've reached a streak of 3. Whether or not they get to 4, we'll find out in 2020. John Tortorella's keeping things going pretty well in Columbus. Dallas, they were in a good spot to make the playoffs, and then they decided, nah, they backed out of the playoffs. That's the 8th time in 10 years Dallas missed the playoffs. This past season that we just had, there was a lot of Dallas fans that were like, hey, Shannon, you got to believe in the Stars. What is with you? Why do you keep talking about them missing the playoffs? They look like they should make the playoffs. This is why. Of the 8 times that they missed the playoffs, I would say at least 3 or 4 of those times they could have and should have made the playoffs, and they just found a way not to. So it's kind of their MO. If there's a way to miss the playoffs, Dallas finds it. It's really impressive in a sad, macabre way. All right. Edmonton, high expectations, rewarded with 78 points by the team. McDavid scores 108. He is actually a part of 47.2% of the team's goals. So it's McDavid and not much else. And this is where we start actually really feeling bad for Connor McDavid. And the interesting thing is, going into this season, there were a lot of expectations this team was going to be in the playoffs. They could potentially be a finalist. We're looking at, a Stanley Cup going back to Edmonton, Connor McDavid being a hero, and a year later, McDavid's still a hero. The rest of it, not so much. LA, 98 points. They get swept in the first round, and it's not just a sweep. They can't score a goal. They can't get a goal. Part of that is Marc-Andre Fleury being absolutely fantastic for Vegas. Part of that is LA can't score. They would go through that the following season as well, and they would bring in Ilya Kovalchuk that summer to try and fix that issue. We know, of course, that doesn't really work out the way they wanted it to. Jonathan Quick has a save percentage of .947 and wins 0 games. I still think that's obnoxious. Quick was absolutely fantastic, but couldn't score a goal. So they're out in 4. Still feel bad for the guy. That happens to LA, and we know, of course, that would be their. It doesn't look like they're bouncing back this coming season, so that's likely their last year where they're potentially a contender. Nashville, 117 points. They lose in round 2 to the Jets. So regular season, fantastic, much better than it was in 2017. Postseason result, not as good as it was in 2017. I think Nashville plays better as underdogs than they do as favorites. And this season kind of showed that to me. And also, Pekka Rinne, not as good in the 2018 playoffs as he was in the 2017 playoffs. Jets burned him a couple of times there. New Jersey makes the playoffs, first time in 5 years. And Taylor Hall is the first New Jersey Devil to ever win a Hart Trophy that season. So, Taylor Hall, big star, has that breakout season that he was supposed to with Edmonton years and years before. He never has turned into the goal scorer that he was supposed to be when he was drafted. Pretty good point producer, pretty good setup man, though. Islanders, poor season. Very disappointing season. And that means big changes. Lou Lamoriello comes in. Barry Trotz is going to come in as well. John Tavares decides he's had enough, and he's going to go sign somewhere else. And the funny thing is, the ripples that come out of that is, To me, the Islanders become a better team. They're no longer built around Tavares. They're built around the idea of running 4 lines, 6 defensemen, and buying into the team aspect. And a lot of them the following season will see their actual goals and points totals drop, but the team gets better. So I think if they'd kept Tavares, they would have scored more goals. I don't know that the team would have had as much success. We'll never know. Ottawa, 67 points. Huge disappointment. And this is where Ottawa really becomes a tire fire. And it doesn't start with the Duchesne deal. That's where everybody's going to point to it. And it does really collapse after that deal. But while they weren't losing in regulation very much before that deal, they were losing. They were losing in overtime. They were losing in shootouts. They weren't able to find victories. And it was something that I took notice of right away early on in the season, that they weren't really getting convincing victories. And they just seemed to be off. And they were off all year. And then what we found out after the season was that Hoffman and Karlsson were butting heads based on some drama behind the scenes. And, of course, Hoffman gets traded during the summer. Karlsson would get traded later in the summer as well. And, yeah, Ottawa's full-on rebuild is in progress. And I think what made it even worse was that Karlsson had no relationship with management whatsoever. They didn't even talk to him for the last, I think he said, 6 months that he was there. He didn't even talk to management. And he did grab the puck. The last game that they played, the end of that game, he did grab the puck. Which at the time a lot of people read into, and I said, well, I don't know, maybe. The one thing is, Erik Karlsson seemed to still be willing to stay with Ottawa for this past season we just had. And seemed to genuinely be disappointed when they traded him. That relationship didn't work for Ottawa. I don't necessarily believe that it was that Karlsson wanted out. I do think there was an issue between Hoffman and Karlsson that had to be resolved. Hoffman had to go. I don't think Karlsson had to. And of course, Hoffman got moved to San Jose. San Jose then flipped him to Florida. So when Karlsson goes to San Jose, part of the promise is that if he gets swapped to an Eastern team, that another first-round draft pick would go to Ottawa because of what happened with Hoffman. So it was a disaster, and it was one that Doug Wilson said, well, I'll take advantage of this. And he did. Pittsburgh. They lost to the Capitals in the second round. Very, very unusual. It's something that usually doesn't happen. And I don't know that it ever happens again. I do expect Pittsburgh and Washington to meet in round 2 again at some point soon, because that's just sort of what happens. Malkin had 98 points and Kessel had 92. Things are pretty sunshiny in Pittsburgh, but rumors of Kessel being on his way out of town really get going that summer. He doesn't leave yet, though. Not yet. St. Louis, they missed the playoffs in the last game of the year. That was a very exciting game. Felt like a playoff game, even though it was regular season, because one of them was going to the playoffs and one of them wasn't. And it is the St. Louis Blues who missed the playoffs. Now, they traded for Ryan O'Reilly that summer. If St. Louis had made the playoffs, if St. Louis had, say, a second or third round run in the playoffs, would they have still made the Ryan O'Reilly trade? So in another little what-if thing, what if they make the playoffs? What if they look like they're on the right track? Do they still feel the need to make the Ryan O'Reilly deal? One of those things that I ask myself. Tampa Bay, 113 points, and they lost in round 3 to the Capitals, so getting to the conference finals is not a problem for Tampa. The problem is advancing to the Stanley Cup final and winning the Stanley Cup. Kucherov had 100 points for them in 2018. So, pretty good season overall for Tampa. They do not reach their ultimate goal. Toronto, 105 points. One of the best regular seasons in Toronto Maple Leaf history. They were, of course, out in round 1 against the Boston Bruins. And everybody remembers Game 7. It's funny how with Toronto and Boston, everybody remembers the Game 7s. Both in 2019 and 2018. They seem to forget the rest of the series. They really aren't a lopsided series at all. That's why they're ending in 7, not 6. I still think it would make a big difference if Toronto actually had home ice advantage in one of these Game 7s. They signed Tavares that following summer, and we're still seeing repercussions in their lineup as a result of adding Tavares and that $11 million cap hit in and around everything else they have to do. So, Toronto Maple Leafs, on their way up, contender, I would argue yes. There are plenty of people who say, hey, to be a contender, you got to survive the first round of the playoffs. Until they at least get out of the first round, you can't really say they're a contender. So yeah, Toronto in the news, and always in the news in Canada. Washington, 105 points, Stanley Cup champs. Only time that's happened, and it felt like the weight of the world came off their shoulders. Ovi had 15 goals in the playoffs, and did so many keg stands with the cup that they had to check and make sure that it wasn't damaged at all, and kind of put down a rule that, okay, no more inappropriate touching of the Stanley Cup. Looking at you, Ovi. But yeah, so finally all those years of frustration melt away for the Capitals and their fans, and Ovechkin absolutely loses his mind that summer and has plans of a 2019 Stanley Cup that'll get derailed because winning back-to-back Stanley Cups is very, very difficult in the National Hockey League. Looking at some leaders, your scoring leader is Connor McDavid, 41 goals, 67 assists, 108 points. Claude Giroux, number 2 on the list, 34 goals, 68 assists for 102 points. And then Nikita Kucherov, 39 goals, 61 assists, 100 points. Defenseman, John Carlson, 15 goals, 53 assists, 68 points. Brent Burns, 12 goals, 55 assists, 67 points. And that's considered a down year for Burns. Burns' defensive numbers were poor, and only 12 goals. It's considered a poor season by his standard. John Klingberg, 8 goals, 59 assists, 67 points for Dallas. Excellent coming out season for John Klingberg. Rookies, Barzal leads the way, 22 goals, 63 assists, 85 points. Clayton Keller, 23 goals, 42 assists, 65 points. And Yanni Gourde, 25 goals, 39 assists, 64 points. And notable by his absence is Brock Besser. He got injured down the stretch and ended up missing the top 3 scorers. Had a very good year, 29 goals, but he did end up getting hurt. Save percentage leaders, Carter Hutton, 931. He, of course, would get signed as a free agent by Buffalo that following summer. Antti Raanta, 930 save percentage for the Arizona Coyotes, where he needs to make a save. Roberto Luongo, 929 save percentage. That's right, Luongo had a 929 the year before he retired. And Corey Crawford, who had a 929 save percentage before being injured for the Chicago Blackhawks, which played a large role in why the Chicago Blackhawks missed the playoffs in 2018. So there you go. The 2017-2018 season. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just happen upon this video, and that means there's only one video left in this playlist. I'll get that in before the regular season. But again, let me know your thoughts. Thanks for all the support, and I'll talk to you again soon.